Netflix has just released the 9th film in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. In it, online influencers descend on the mostly abandoned town of Harlow, Texas, only to be slaughtered by the man known as Leatherface. I'm Stephen Thompson, and today we are talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre on Pop Culture Happy Hour from NPR. Here with me today is Morning Edition producer Mark Rivers. Hello, Mark.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
It's great to have you. Also joining us is Jordan Cruciola, a writer and producer and the host of the podcast Feeling Seen on Maximum Fun. Hi, Jordan.
Hi, thank you so much for having me back on this wonderful occasion.
On this most hallowed occasion. And filling out our panel is writer and film critic Shay Vassar. Welcome back, Shay.
Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be something else.
It is a joy to have you all here. So in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there is a massacre in Texas involving chainsaws. I could go on to say it's more complicated than that, but it really isn't. We get a new throng of pretty clueless outsiders. They inadvertently unleash a horror, grisly mayhem ensues. But the history of Texas Chainsaw Massacre is kind of fascinating. The first film from all the way back in 1974 was directed by Tobe Hooper. It was a grungy, low-budget, notorious cult classic, and actually not all that gory by today's standards. From there, the series went over the top silly, as in 1986's Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, my daughter's favorite movie, only to become more streamlined as it's been rebooted in fits and starts over the years. Now, the latest Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie heads directly to Netflix, but it's also going back to its roots as it brings back the character of Sally Hardesty, the lone survivor of Leatherface's first rampage. There are also a lot of gruesome deaths by chainsaw. The film is directed by David Blue Garcia and stars Sarah Yarkin, Elsie Fisher, Mark Burnham as Leatherface, and Olwen Fouéré as Sally Hardesty. Jordan, I am going to start with you. Where do you stand on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series, and where do you stand on the new Netflix movie?
On the series of these super killer, Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Leather is not my favorite, but it is the franchise that disturbs me the most. Watching the original, that's still one of the most upsetting horror movies I can experience. There is something so upsetting and brutal and just real. You just sort of can't shake it after. It's like a real gotta go shower movie. And then just the level of nihilistic brutality that carries through even into the craziest entry of the franchise with Texas Chainsaw, The Next Generation, with Matthew McConaughey in it in the mid-90s and Renee Zellweger, the sociopathy of that movie. And it really made those movies a great fit for remakes in the 2000s. Tonally, horror of the 2000s was really the most nihilistic we had been since the horror of the 1970s, like in a post-Vietnam era and then in a post-9/11 era. So it translated really well to those sort of updates. And then you have this 2010s era where we've sort of gone out to sea with what the identity of a Texas Chainsaw movie is. And I say that with the full admission that Texas Chainsaw 3D, starring Alex Daddario from 2013, is my favorite Texas Chainsaw movie. Do your thing, cuz. Greatest line in the whole franchise. It's a franchise that probably makes me feel worse than any of the other four major super killers. And for that, I respect it. But it's not... I would say that this movie took me hostage, and at a certain point it became my kind of Texas Chainsaw movie, which I really didn't see coming in the first 20 minutes.
Well, explain what you mean by your kind of Texas Chainsaw movie for those who are not as steeped in the lore of this series as you are.
I'm a maximalist. And I was like, where can I place what this movie is making me feel like this is? This is so crazy. This movie feels like if Rob Zombie directed a Japanese splatter movie. And I'm not saying this is like Tokyo Gore Police or Meatball Machine. It's not that full tilt. This is still an American movie. But there's something about the Rob Zombie Carnival of Horrors aesthetic paired with the straight up silliness of the way the violence ratchets up in this movie. The number of times people get thrown inexplicable distances, my jaw was on the floor. I was laughing out loud to myself. If you're somebody inclined to watch a 9th Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, this is the Malignant of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre universe.
We can end the episode there.
Well, Shay Vassar, I am going to implore you to follow that.
Yeah, I will say that Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Leatherface might be my favorite of the four horsemen you're talking about. I do really like Freddy Krueger as well. I think he's really creepy, and I hate the idea. I love sleeping. So the idea of not being able to sleep really scares me. But I grew up in Oklahoma. So yeah, okay, anyone who's listening who's from Oklahoma or Texas are like, do not compare the two. But I'm going to compare the two and say that there is something really creepy about all those houses that I grew up seeing, and then you just happen upon one and there happens to be cannibals living there. So that really always got me. And the original one of my favorite movies. I'm a big horror fan. I think it's something really scary. I think the fact that it is done during the day, this is way before Midsommar even was thought about. So this is the original. In the middle of the day, in the middle of the heat, is just, you come onto the worst nightmare and something that is so unthinkable. So that really gets me. This movie, I was along for the ride until maybe about 75% in. And then I was like, I don't know if I'm buying this anymore. But like Jordan said, if you're going to watch the 9th Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you're probably not expecting it to be as classic as the first, as purposefully aware as the second, and then so on and so forth. So I did think that some credit needs to be given to the direction, because for what this screenplay had, the direction was as good as possible. The writing, horrible. I did not know what was going on. I was like, so they bought a town?
That took me out immediately. That was kind of like, all right, I don't know if I can stick with this.
Okay, Mark, now I need to know what you think.
I mean, listen, I think to enjoy the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, particularly the first one, and horror in general, you have to kind of enjoy on a kind of masochistic level being worked over. Sometimes I do. And it really depends on whether I can feel a person behind that or like an algorithm. And with the first one, there's such a physicality to that movie. There's dirt in his fingernails, sweat on his brow. You feel like that movie is like coming for you. And with this new one, this just felt like an algorithm. Just watched the first one, calculated how to update it, and then just off an assembly line. I mean, in the first one, they were hippies. How do we make that 21st century and even worse? I know. Let's make them influencers.
Wow.
Oh, even better. They're gentrifying influencers.
Oh my gosh.
We're just setting them up for the slaughter. I don't think there was just a lot of motivation there. I think it hit the expected beats. I don't know if it even got that absurd. I would have liked it if it got to absurd levels. There's a scene in this movie that I don't want to spoil that kind of really takes the massacre part to heart. And the movie also kind of brings in like real world atrocity in a way that does not feel earned at all. And I don't really know what to do with it. And that to me is when it kind of got gross. Like I was with the movie and then, they're gentrifying this town, which there's a Confederate flag that one of the characters sees almost immediately. And does this make Leatherface just like kind of the anti-gentrifiers? Like, is this his motivation? I didn't know what they wanted to do with any of this stuff. And I think with the first one, you could tell the director, he had really thought about like the filth and the degradation and what you're supposed to get out of that and like what it meant. And I do not think these filmmakers thought all these things through at all.
No, I don't think a lot of thought was put into some of the issues that this film is sort of half-heartedly trying to raise.
No.
You mentioned gentrification. There's school shootings. You mentioned the Confederate flag and the influencers. The movie could not care less about those things. We talk on the show sometimes about sequel bloat and how each time you make a new movie in a series, it's kind of has to be bigger and longer and louder than the one before it. This really has almost the opposite. It's like contraction. It's an hour and 23 minutes long, actually the same length as the 1974 movie. And there's like 9 minutes of credits at the end.
Yeah. If we did an anthology series of one episode each was a famous horror property, it kind of feels like that. And this is the Texas Chainsaw installment.
Right. It starts dispatching people pretty quickly, and it does so with kind of almost mechanical insistence as it goes along. They didn't really put a lot on the bones of this plot. Now, my relationship with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series, I grew up in central Wisconsin, about an hour from where Ed Gein lived. And so I mean, Shay, you mentioned, growing up in Oklahoma and feeling some of the ties to that Texas setting. I felt some of the ties to that Ed Gein story, which also helped inspire Psycho. So to me, the first movie is super terrifying. The second movie is so wildly off the rails, almost kind of campy. It's almost like if a horror movie were also a school play, like in terms of its production
That's a
values.
really good way to describe
What
it.
level of school? Like middle school play?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And to me, like that is fun because there is yes, it's nihilistic. Yes, it is extremely transgressive, but it's also at play. And to me, probably my central beef with this movie is there's nothing about it that feels like it's in play. It's very mechanical, it's very brutal, but it's not silly. It doesn't let you laugh at it or with it. It's just kind of systematically dispatching people in a way that I kind of found sort of thudding after a while. And I just wanted a little bit more of a spark to it.
A thing that I was captivated by about this movie, and that I think provides a really interesting sort of case study for how we make movies now, how we consider things in making movies now. And then let's put that obviously specifically in the lens of horror. This movie, it's like it got a brief on progress, but it was heavily redacted. So we get this like deeply sad, upsetting, the movie's completely incapable of working with the detail of like how a school shooting factors into this movie. And then also, we have influencers who have shown up, and like one of the first things we see them do is evict a woman from her home. In
Right.
slasher movies, people show up and they like are stupid, and that's how they get themselves killed. That's the tried and true. This one, they straight up show up as the land-holding landlords.
They start out as the bad guys.
Yes, like, and Leatherface is like the Vox Populi, eat the rich. You're like, this is actually a revenge movie for Leatherface? Like, they didn't just walk into his house. They killed his mom and they kicked him out of it. Like, whoa, okay, that's a perspective. And then also, this is such a specific thing to horror, of making it a less white landscape. It actually isn't a one-to-one plug-and-play of just putting in non-white characters. Because I was watching this, there's no sexuality put onto any of the characters outside of the couple. And I was like, there are no queer people in this movie. Thank God.
The movie itself is like sexless. Like there's like no.
It's very sexless. And I was like, queer people don't need to be here for this. And I was also like, don't bring people of color into this nonsense. This is white nonsense. Like showing up in the middle of rural America and being like, I'm going to buy a town and start a utopia. That feels like white nonsense. I have a disaster podcast as well, and Van Lathan came on that. And we were talking about how there are decisions by white characters that you simply couldn't substitute a black character in for one of these characters because their cultural experience would mean their decision matrix for running into this particular danger or absurdity would be weighed very differently.
Right.
And yet we just have people running into this absurdity here where I was like, we need to consider that, like, in the march toward a better and more equitable landscape and more diverse faces on screen, it's not simply a matter of putting any non-white character where a white character would be. And similarly, like, again, putting a queer character here. And if you would ask me to believe that a queer character was going to go out to this Texas town, that queer person's going back to Austin, where they have like a reasonable measure of safety infrastructure around them.
Well, that character did want to go back. That character was
Yeah.
reluctantly present in this town.
Now, Jordan, I'm with you. I mean, it's what's kept me out of cabins in the woods like my whole life is like, this is not something that I would do. And so little of it was just thought through.
Well, and that's why, like, part of me wants to be careful in how I word this, because I don't want to give the film too much credit. Maybe their goal was to kind of make them the unlikable and talk about some of the dangers of, you know, this white liberal kind of utopia, whatever. But again, I don't want to give the film that much credit. But that was originally where I was like, oh, maybe they're doing something with this. Like, you know, I talk and read a lot about like land ownership and the idea of, you know, like indigenous land back movements. And so the last thing I want to see is a whole bunch of like people that are just going to buy up a town, evict a woman, set Leatherface on a rampage. Also, these people are not very bright because, like, why did they let the one girl go with the mom to the... I was like...
That was baffling. That was mind-boggling.
Oh my gosh, there is absolutely no
Incredible.
explanation for that decision.
Like, with the cop? Like, so many red flags. Like, immediately I was like, this isn't the movie I think it's going to be.
I do have to shout out the one line where they're literally auctioning off the town to people with food trucks.
And sold to Candace Brady of Brady's Brunch. Oh, I love brunch. That's great.
I love brunch.
Yes.
And that's why, like, I feel like the value add for a movie like this is, okay, this movie I'm not going to assume what level of awareness or idea it has about any of the themes that it's working with here. But I do find like in conversations like this, it starts to become a useful text of like, how do we make horror now? How do we consider horror now? And gosh, I wish people would seek out conversations like this, because I feel like there's a lot of value to hearing people discuss like, I see what you did there, but here's why that's not Fear Street. Like, here's why that didn't come together like this. Yeah, it is helpful as an object of study. It is a case study kind of film with, again, people being thrown shocking distances.
Sometimes thrown shocking distance by a chainsaw. Like lifted up by a chainsaw and hurled.
No, that's what I kept thinking too.
Yeah. My favorite character moments, I really liked Elsie Fisher. I really liked her in this. And I really liked Olwen. She only got like a couple moments, but when you see the moment of recognition of when she realizes that this experience of the original massacre in 74 did not mean to Leatherface what it means to her, I thought that was a really well played moment. And it gives us our like Jamie Lee Curtis bring back Laurie Strode Halloween 2018 experience, which I thought in that little small moment, it played really well. But then when you see her also wheeling around a corner, holding a shotgun, being like, ha ha, I'm back. I was like, okay, that's gold. I'm sorry. It's been a long time since 1974. You cannot tell me Leatherface is the pinnacle of madness anymore. We know that the public consciousness has so many more horrible things. So give me this woman going absolute batty crazy. And I wish I could have seen more of that, because it was like, yeah, let's see the face of decades worn down of like fear and punishment and anxiety and self-isolation. Sure, let's go nuts with that. But like to give me Leather over and over again and be like, he's the worst thing you've ever seen. I'm like, not anymore.
I was actually thinking about that when prepping for the episode, because I was rereading some stuff on how the original was such a masterpiece in the way that it changed. It's one of the pinnacles for the beginning of, postmodern horror, and this idea of nothing's tied up neat and nice at the end. And it's one of my favorite endings ever because it's so beautiful. Again, it's like the setting sun. And if you've ever been to the Midwest and just seen those sunsets with the open field, it's like just a glorious moment. But yet she's running away from a guy wearing a skin mask and like wielding around a huge chainsaw. That's the whole point. But it says so much about the turmoil for that time. And so why is it that horror is somehow just becoming, it has less to say, but yet it also feels like it's like not necessarily for entertainment either. Mm-hmm. So like, what's it doing?
I think horror still has plenty to say when you think of movies like, The Witch or The Babadook or Get Out, Us. Like horror is still this great medium to get at social ills and what is going on. And I just think with these franchises, these filmmakers are really failing to grapple with what these specific characters would have to say for now. How can I bring this character from the 70s into now? How can I bring Ghostface, into now with the latest Scream movie?
Yeah.
On a cynical level, it just kind of makes me think about how if I'm a Gen Z viewer, it's like seeing that these same people that have been in power for decades that are still just kind of ruining things. Like, it's like, okay, so Leatherface is still around, still killing people, just like he was in 1974. It's like nothing has changed. We still haven't beaten these people. These same ghouls and specters from the past, we just cannot get rid of them. And then the bad guys in real life who've been in power for so long, we can't get rid of them either.
Absolutely.
All right, well, we want to know what you think about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/PCHH or tweet us at PCHH. Up next, what's making us happy this week?
This message comes from NPR sponsor Ursa Major Skincare, obsessively crafting clean face and body care essentials made with a spirit of adventure. Ursa Major's fantastic face wash, made with cedar, spearmint, and lime, is designed to keep your face feeling fresh and clean while transporting you to the great outdoors. Enter code POP at ursamajorvt.com for 20% off your order.
There are millions of books out there just waiting for you. But how to keep up? Introducing NPR's Book of the Day. Every weekday, we feature some of our favorite conversations with authors and writers about their latest books. You can check it out in about the time it takes to walk the dog. Happy reading.
And now for our favorite segment of This Week and Every Week, What's Making Us Happy This Week? Jordan Cruciola, what's making you happy this week?
The Amazon Prime show Reacher. It's got that great dry sense of humor. It's got good mystery. It's got good crime solving. It's got good action. It's got good beatdowns. It's already been renewed for a season 2, and I cannot wait to hang out with my friend Jack Reacher when the show comes back. And if you just want some like good chill out laughs and ass kickings, I couldn't recommend Reacher enough. Get on that one.
Nice. That's Reacher. Jordan Cruciola, thank you so much. Shay Vassar, what's making you happy this week?
So every winter, I like to revisit some of my favorite books. So this year, I've been diving into The Secret History by Donna Tartt. So it follows a transfer student who goes to a college in the Northeast and gets involved with murder. If you don't buy into the story and kind of the eliteness of that Tartt creates through the narrator's perspective, the book won't work for you. But I also don't know many people that don't buy into it just because Tartt's writing is so good. Her sentence structure and just the way that she creates atmosphere. I could go on about it, but yeah, I think this is my third time reading it, and it's definitely one that I recommend. An oldie but goodie.
So that's The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Thank you so much, Shay Vassar. Mark Rivers, what is making you happy this week?
Steven Soderbergh's Kimmy, which just came out on HBO Max. I feel like at this stage in his career, he's just become like morally opposed against like making bad movies. Like I think he's on a really good run. I think this is one of his better recent movies. So it stars Zoe Kravitz. It takes a kind of conspiracy thriller vibe of movies like Parallax View and The Conversation and kind of updates it for now, for a time of COVID and big tech. And so like the pandemic mood of things just really kind of compounds the sense of paranoia and isolation. It's a really meaty role for Kravitz. I feel like it's really tight, lean 90 minutes. He just finds a great way to just kind of externalize the kind of physical and emotional world that this woman is inhabiting, in the world that we've kind of all been inhabiting by going through the pandemic. So I think if you guys want a really fun, taut thriller, Kimmy's a great choice.
Nice. Thank you. That's Kimmy on HBO Max. Mark Rivers, thank you so much. We talked at the top of this show about a force that cannot be killed, that goes away and comes back over and over and over again over the course of many years. I am talking about the announcement last week that Hulu is bringing back for 20 new episodes one of my all-time favorite animated series, Futurama. Futurama has been around for like 20 years and done 140 episodes, which should give you a sense of how many hiatuses this show has had. It gets canceled, it gets brought back on a different network. But I love Futurama so much. My daughter and I have just wrapped up yet another rewatch of this wonderful, weird, witty, crazy, fun, gag-filled show. And I'm psyched to have more of it. So that is the return of Futurama. That is what is making me happy this week. Now, before we go, leading up to the Oscars, we're going to be talking about the Best Picture winners, and we want to know what you think. What is the Best Picture winner? You can vote now at npr.org/bestpicture. Again, you can vote at npr.org/bestpicture. That brings us to the end of our show. You can find all of us on Twitter. You can find me at I Dislike Steven. You can follow Mark at Mark A. Rivers. That's Mark with a C. You can follow Jordan at JorCru, JorCru. And you can follow Shay at Just Shay Vassar. You can follow editor Jessica Reedy at Jessica_Reedy. Producers Candace Lim at The Candace Lim and Rommel Wood at Blurgosphere. And you can follow producer Mike Katzif at Mike Katzif. That's Katzif. Mike's band Hello Come In provides the music you are bobbing your head to right now. Thanks to all of you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great time, y'all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Happy Hour from NPR. We will see you all next week.
Many of us are rethinking how we spend our time.
Work has its place in our lives, but it's not our whole reason for living.
I think play is fundamental.
We just need to redefine what we call rest.
A special 3-part series, Work, Play, Rest, on the TED Radio Hour from NPR.